So I think the day's been building up quite nicely from all the sessions. We talked in the morning about the hyper-casuals, and then we have this awesome matrix. There was a lot of user experience, so now it's gradually nicely progressed to thinking about the user, right? So more than just browser and features. And it's super important. And our approach here is more economical, kind and considerate. I'm not going to toss you a white paper and tons of extensive code samples or anything like that. The first part on accessibility will deal with one specific kind of disability, which is motor impairments. And we'll discuss a little bit how it impacts users and people who consume our digital products, and in this case, games. So a little bit about me. Luis Rodriguez. I'm based out of the Washington, D.C. area. I teach workshops on AI and digital product development and delve into accessibility also. I'm also involved with the American Psychological Association. And we think a lot about coping strategies and interventions and psychological interventions for people who suffer from disabilities. And when we look at the statistics, it turns out in the US, there's over 38 million people who suffer from some form of disability. And to give you an idea, about 70% are over the age of 60, so you kind of get the feel for the numbers, for the national impact. And so our goal is to really make web games usable by as many people as possible. And so that is the goal when we think about usability, and I think that's why it's built up nicely to this game. And so here's what I propose, is that we can turn on a set of accessible features, in accessible mode. And yes, we've done through accessible rich internet application tags. We can do a lot into making things keyboard accessible, and that's great. But also through ability switches, and we'll look at some ability switches that people with motor impairments have to use. So it's more than just a keyboard that we're used to. Definitely, building voice capability into games and digital products is very important. And of course, in the case of people who suffer from motor impairments, moving beyond gestural interfaces, right, because of certain limitations, and we'll get into that. So it's this idea of flipping on an accessible mode for our web games. And so yes, we can do a lot about the keyboard, and we can target specific keys, and we can get fancy with a lot of these explicit code libraries that can let us do that. But users with motor impairments rely on these things, on these ability switches. So anything from sip and puff headsets to wands, or these are used without permission, so full disclosure, but I've credited the photos. Recently, the Xbox game controller is super awesome, right? It includes the switches on the controller, and it's enabling people who suffer from motor impairments to enjoy these experiences into games. And so again, these can be hooked, right, to a laptop or a device through USB or Bluetooth. So there's a lot of opportunity to build on this. But let's give a human face to these devices, right? So these are these more than 38 million people who, you want to think about the human impact, right? Go for the human win into what we're building, into what we're enabling. So again, lots of different age groups, but this is given a human touch to the accessibility factor. So let's discuss ability switches. They can run the whole spectrum, from the slightest touch to a sensor to a severe blow, right? And we'll get into it because people who suffer from motor impairments, they can be very limited into their touch, but they can also suffer from knee-jerk or jerk reactions and sudden violent blows. And so these ability switches have that ability. In the case of voice enabling, here, and I'm not talking about text-to-speech recognition or voice recognition or text-to-speech. I'm talking about voice conversation and conversation design, right? And there's been a lot of development in this field, right, with products such as Alexa and from other companies. that it's really developed, and so we can really create these real, personalized experiences that respond to personalized expressions of people, right? And they can be really sensitive to respond and to really capture what the user is trying to say. And so here's a spectrum of motor impairments, anything from cerebral palsy, and again, these are abnormal brain development that affects the reactions of a person. So they also suffer from involuntary movements and reactions. Also, there's neural tube defects, and these are passed on congenitally. And so these include learning disabilities that are almost side effects. And so can you just imagine having a lot of upper torso pain and limit, right? Being limited into your movements. So some people are confined to a wheelchair with this condition. And there's also muscle and joint pains and conditions such as arthritis, right? So the slightest touch, the slightest contact results in a lot of pain. And these are our users. And trauma incidents, right? So you can have an event such as a car accident that just marks you for the rest of your life, and then you're severely limited. And so what you were priorly used to, interacting with games or digital products or looking at a screen, now you can suffer from syncope or from confusion or from dyslexia even, from vision and blurry vision. And so psychologically speaking, now we can try and get into the mind of users with motor impairments, right? There's psychological studies that have shown that they suffer from a lot of anxiety. They feel like they're constantly being watched. And so it just makes things difficult for people. So there's psychological studies that they'll feel like someone's progressing from looking to staring. So people will look for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, up to a minute incrementally, and they'll stop. So this is some of the anxieties that users with motor impairment feel. And there's some stress factors involved, right? There's stress with their relationships with family and with friends, but they're seeking independence, right? And that takes us to the next key, which is the ability to develop coping strategies. They're seeking information, and here's where web games play a key factor. They provide a sort of a coping strategy, provide escapism, and that's what gives a huge opportunity. And so, just to give you an idea of what it's like to suffer from a motor impairment, and you can develop a slick, 3D environment. I really wish David was here to have seen this. But can you imagine you create this immersive experience, and you're suffering from neural tube defects or cerebral palsy, and you have these violent, reactions with your limbs. And so what you thought was just a simple mouse drag to a scene, you're constantly shaking. So it impacts the experience of our games. In the case of other conditions, now they're related. They have other causes or effects related, where they develop vision and blurry vision and confusion. Right. So this is what happens also. Simple drag and drop that we can design and bake into our products, right? Into our games with these gestures. Can be confusing and cannot be as easily as expressive as we thought what we were designing. So this is some games from PBS that show this. And at the American Psychological Association, we're experimenting with using web game technology to teach psychological concepts. So having users, as you can see, the mouse pointer just shakes, right? When users with motor impairments try to navigate our products and our games. And it just results in confusion, right, and blurry vision. So this helps us to feel and to see and to think from the user's perspective, right? And I think that's what it's built up nicely to today. And so, even if you have small target areas that need to be very specific, these can be very difficult, right? So in the case of, a simple carrot or arrow that you're trying to target to progress, to reveal more information, it can be very difficult, right? It cannot be taken for granted, as you can see, trying to target a specific area. And so that's why I think that users requiring accessibility, these users can be our best gamers because they're already in a certain zone where they require beyond normal focus, they require extra determination, and that extra bit of concentration to get through life, to cope, through things. So they can make our best gamers, and there's a huge opportunity for web games. And so, again, these are very generalized. I'm not going to show a lot of code samples, but here is some ways to flip on that accessible mode, right? So anything from rethinking exact touch targets or very specific elements on the screen and really widening that out, really rethink those inputs and outputs will help tremendously. If we are requiring our users to hold the device for too long, that would be very difficult for someone suffering from a motor impairment. So we want to rethink, right, the mobile experience and having a user hold the device for very long. And that takes us to rethinking movements. So widening out what those mouse areas or those touch targets will be, right? Those are what we consider easy wins. And in the case of selecting text, that can be very difficult. And really getting away from small, precise movements and small, precise areas on the user interface for the games. And we've talked a lot about feedback today. So really reevaluating, requiring time-based interactions and requiring movement or specific areas to progress and reveal more information. So again, these are some simple, easy wins that we can flip on in an accessible mode. And here's different schools of thought on this, but rethinking engagement. What you think is a very super slick interaction for a user could just be a task. So if in an accessible mode, if we can just convert that to a simple task so that a user with a motor impairment can progress through the game and continue their gaming experience, that's a simple win. Right? So that's something to think about. And if there's anything you can take from this presentation, and thank you for hanging on through today, is rethinking the impact. So do the best we can with familiarizing ourselves with accessibility standards. My understanding is that in the gaming community, there's a lot of complaints about the WCAG guidelines because they're somehow difficult to parse through or find information. But just trying our best to think about users. And if there's anything else that you do, is just think about users with disabilities, right? That require assistive technologies that we've seen. But also being versed in the limitations of the platforms, right? That we've discussed, the hardware, being aware of what those limitations are, and really work in testing. And we do a lot of unit testing, but really think about trying to do some earlier testing with accessibility before getting to those kinds of tests. And something that helps reset expectations for users in an accessible mode is providing an accessibility statement from the get-go, from the beginning. So things such as, this will require JAWS or the Apple Talk plugin, right? This helps us to really craft a good gaming experience. And I'll touch really briefly, I'm running out of time, but about building voice capability. And I can't stress enough, I'm not talking about text-to-speech or speech recognition. I'm talking about conversational design, right? And there's a lot of new developments in what's known as the voice UX ecosystem, right? There's a lot of opportunities, and the benefits far outweigh the risks, right? Because now we can offer a truly personalized experience that really can help someone that requires assistive technologies and someone with disabilities to get through to the games. And so just one question that can help us is, will people want to talk to your web game? And I venture to say yes, because in the case of users with disability, There's that escapism, right? There's that coping strategy that our games can provide. They provide a certain value, and there's a lot of potential and opportunity. Voice design opens up a plethora of analytics. In the case of performance, it can help you see sometimes where users are choking up or getting stuck, and you can adjust like server loads and where things are happening. And so, in the case of some users, yes, they require voice commands, and they use voice commands to accomplish tasks. And so again, these are some of the thinking behind voice design. And so again, we can't stress the content enough. So we're thinking about adding voice capability. Think of the content, the context, right? If we break that context, the whole experience can fail. So really hone in on that context. And so I'll just close in with these last two slides. So traditionally nowadays, we have to understand what we're doing. We have to understand accessibility tasks. And we're getting familiar with guidelines, and we're having these workshops, right, to really understand. And we go after and we look for these code libraries that have these useful behaviors to help us meet those standards. And in the end, we program and we formulate an explicit solution. Now, here's where artificial intelligence can kick in. Because now we're offloading this cognitive labor that we have to struggle so much to understand accessibility. So now we focus on that accessibility criterion, on that user research. And now an AI can match those heuristics with the structures that will provide a program. And this is the bleeding edge research, right, that it's worth looking into. And this is the future for meeting accessibility in web games, right? And there's different schools of thoughts, but these things are already in the works. And so this is what I propose. It's a snapshot, right, in 15 minutes about turning on accessible mode for users with motor impairments. And I thank you for letting me speak with you today.